can't zoom in. Not really. Do I want to hold it up? I think I'll just let you hold it up.
Okay.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Legend Fiction Show, and today we're joined by Katy Campbell, one of our favorite mentors. I mean, they're all our favorite mentors in the Legend Fiction community, and this is an announcement for her latest book, which has just come out. I'm going to hold it up. There we go. Doctors, Assassins, and Other Tyrants. So Katy's got a signature brand of like humor, not like humor. It is humorous. Katy, what's the inspiration for this book, and when is it coming out?
Yeah, so this book is actually coming out on May 13th, which as of this recording is tomorrow. So yay for that. Yeah, and this book is a sequel to Love, Treachery, and Other Terrors. So it's definitely better to read this one first if you haven't already read this one. But if you have, you can jump right in. And it's inspired because when I wrote Love, Treachery, and Other Terrors, there was a side character who was fairly minor character. And I found him just very, very interesting and compelling. And I thought to myself, you know, I really want to give him his own book and explore his character and have his character go on this fantastical adventure to kind of learn about his origins and who he really is. So that's how I came to Doctors, Assassins, and Other Tyrants.
So can you tell us what, I mean, you've sort of done it, like what the book is about. Now, can you give us a little more of the blurb and what it is he's going to discover and why you picked that title?
Yeah, so the story is about this young man named Augustine, who's a squire. He's 17, and he's the king's stepson in Cultahaven, which is the fictional kingdom for the book. And his life is pretty normal, so he thinks, and then he gets kidnapped by these highwaymen who start claiming that he's actually secretly the son of this evil prince. So now he's got to escape those highwaymen, but also uncover the truth about who he is, because who he is not who his parents had originally told him he was. And there's a lot of kind of mystery and scandal that he's got to uncover and then also learn to accept as he goes forward.
And then the title, like why are we lumping doctors in with assassins?
Yes, so that is because there is his girlfriend character in the book is actually a medieval doctor. And she's always saying, you know, you got to be careful, stop doing this stupid, dangerous stuff like getting into these jousts with your cousins. And she's ordering him around because he's very foolhardy and he's got a lot of pride. So he can't really walk away from a challenge. And so lumping the doctor in with assassins and tyrants is very much how he sees things. Like, stop ordering me around and just let me do whatever stupid and dangerous stuff that I want.
I thought she was a fun character. I enjoyed how she pushed right back on him. First, we have to sidebar and ask about the cat. Its name is Kiki. What's the story there? And he's got an arm in a cast, and you're cradling him.
Yes, this is Kiki. She's named after Kiki from Kiki's Delivery Service. We thought a good cat needs a Ghibli name because there's so many great Ghibli cats. And we rescued her last Sunday, and the reason she's with me today is because she sprained her paw, probably jumping off stuff in the middle of the night, and she's not really supposed to be unsupervised right now unless she's in a crate, so she's just kind of hanging out with me so she doesn't decide to jump off something else and damage herself more. You know, she's kind of like Augustine in that way. She just doesn't know when to stop.
Okay. Who's the intended audience for the book, and what kind of feeling are you hoping they'll enjoy and they'll get from it?
Yeah, so it is definitely a little bit darker than my other books, I'd say. All of my books, I tend to say they're about YA level. And so anyone I'd say for this book could be maybe 15 through, 99, however old. But we do explore some themes about like, illegitimacy, for example. And, there's some more drama, the murders, stuff like that. So I definitely would say it's probably a little bit older than, say, Love, Treachery, and Other Terrors, which I call it YA, but I'd say for like 10 and up. Whereas this one, I'd say maybe 14 and up for this one.
And it's part of the same world, right? It's like a series where you continue to explore Para Sympan, right?
Yeah, so Para Sympan is just an alternate version of our world. So you still have the same things, but I've made up medieval kingdoms and stuck them in there. So all of the direct kingdoms that we deal with are fantasy kingdoms, because I wanted to have the creative freedom to sort of do whatever I wanted with them. But it's also implied that, France still exists, all these other places in Europe still exist, right? But there's also magical, fairies and unicorns and dragons and all these things. So, like, why can't a fantasy kingdom also exist within that same world?
Yeah, totally. So what have been beta readers' reactions and early readers' reactions to the book? What have they enjoyed most about it?
Yeah, so they definitely like the humor. So it's still, even though it takes a little darker tone than some of my other books, there still is a lot of humor, a lot of making fun of kind of the fairy tale cliches throughout the story. People tend to really like, you mentioned you really liked Lena, the doctor character in it, and people tend to really like her because she's very smart, she's very scientific. She's about as legitimate as medieval doctors got, trained on Hippocrates, who was like top of the line in those days. And she's just a very fun character, and she's exactly what Augustine needs, who to kind of balance him out, because she's very kind of careful and cautious and thinks things through. And he's very much a warrior type, and he really wants to protect the people he loves. And he's very brave and very strong in that way, but he also needs her to kind of balance him out and be the voice of reason. So that dynamic between the two of them is something that people really enjoy.
That's fun. Is there anybody like in history, for example, that inspired this character of Augustine? Do you think of anybody when you were writing him?
I not in history per se. I mean, obviously his name is from Saint Augustine, but they don't have a ton in common aside from having the name. But just talking to a lot of the men in my life, like my husband was telling me about when he was a teenager, and how some of the dumb things he did, like he got into a contest with some other teen guys, just like dipping themselves in cold water, and they got hypothermia. And I was like, that's the dumbest thing I ever heard in my life. Why did you do that? And just how he would react to things that frustrated him with more of like an angry reaction, and how that's a very typical reaction for teen boys to have. Well, they can still be very, sensitive and loving and good, but also kind of have to deal with some of these strong emotions that come with being a young man. And I really wanted to explore that, because my other two male protagonists, Alex from Love, Treachery, and Other Terrors, and Mark from Rosalind's Curse, they've been much more reserved, scholarly type of male characters. And I wanted to kind of branch out a little bit more and explore, let's look at the warrior type, the type of, very brave and, just wants to stand up and do the right thing, but also is very much a teenage boy, and sometimes doesn't think things through all the way before jumping into action.
So what was that experience then like for you, writing a very different kind of character, getting into a different mindset? What was that experience like, and how did you kind of make it feel real for you, and like from other feedback from other people and so on?
Yeah, that's a great question. I loved it, because when I wrote Alex in my first book, right, he was just me at 16, right? And there's nothing, he's just a very human character, and I wouldn't say he's not like a male character. Obviously he is, and he's very masculine, but in a very different way. So for Augustine, I had to kind of go outside myself and think outside myself and talk to people who are different than how I am. And it was just a very rewarding experience. And, I definitely could still relate to him, because there's been times when, I've growing up and seeing that the world's not quite what I thought it was. I've had that experience. Like, I just want to punch a wall, I'm very frustrated with reality as I see it. And that's what he has to go through. He's very optimistic and idealistic. And he's like, there's good guys and there's bad guys, and this is how the world is. And then he suddenly has that reality completely thrown on his head, and has to accept the fact that things are a lot more complicated than he thought. And he reacts to that with, with a lot of anger and frustration. And that's just a human emotion. So even though that might not be like my default emotion, I can still relate to that and still feel it, even though my default reaction might be more of what, Alex would do, kind of retreat into myself and think and worry and be sad. But that doesn't mean I can't relate to a more outward, a more angry, a more frustrated reaction to the same kind of thing.
Yeah. With topics like that, like you mentioned that the book is darker than some of the other ones you've written. What is it that makes it darker? Because these are topics that have been treated in very lighthearted, humorous ways, and there's a lot of comedy out there that does deal with very serious and real things, but it keeps it all very lighthearted and stuff. Why did you embrace the call to the dark side?
Yeah, well, I would say put the caveat on that this book definitely is, when I say it's dark, I'm comparing it to my other books, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So it still is a very lighthearted, very funny book overall, but I also deal with, he's gone through a lot of tragedies, Augustine, in his younger life. So I deal with almost like he has some PTSD from that. And because he has such his primary flaw is pride, he has a very hard time going into that and talking about it. So it kind of comes back to haunt him at various points throughout the story. And then finding out that his dad is really, this very evil, horrible person. He has to deal with the anger and the fact that his mom, who he thought was like this perfect person, had lied to him about it, and then come to accept the fact that she lied and that was wrong, but she was also a victim in that situation too. So there's a lot of, there's a lot of themes that we're dealing with in our modern society. Being a single mom with a deadbeat dad in a horrible situation, that's something that, unfortunately is very prevalent in society. And so it's something I wanted to try to be very sensitive and how I handled, but also something I feel that's important to explore. And while there's a lot of humor and a lot of jokes, I wanted to obviously be careful how I handled some of those topics that are near and dear to so many people's hearts, right?
Wow. If you were to pick 3 movies or 3 books that have a similar feel to this book, what would you pick? Like if it's, or maybe to mash up 2 of them, it's like if this movie meets this movie. Thought about that?
Well, I'm always comparing all of my books. I compare to The Princess Bride a little bit because they all kind of have this, they all kind of have this combination of this heart and this humor, and they're making fun of fairy tales while also still being a fairy tale in and of themselves. So I'd say some of the more lighter tones would definitely be compared to The Princess Bride.
Nice.
Yeah. What other books would I compare this one specifically to?
I mean, I'm getting like Merlin vibes with Princess Bride. Did you ever watch Merlin, the British BBC series?
No, I haven't seen it.
Oh, okay. You need to pause your life and go enjoy that. It's my wife and I have binged that through like at least 3 times, and it's one of the best bits of fantasy TV that's set in Arthurian king. I mean, Merlin is obviously he's a young magician, and he goes to earn a living in Camelot. But the whole point of the series is that he can't use his magic, and he's constantly in situations where he has to, and nobody can find out. And of course, the whole kingdom is anti-magic. So he's in extremely dangerous circumstances, and he ends up getting up to all kinds of fun. And we end up meeting all of the characters of the Round Table before they become the ones we know and love. And anyhow, so that's a ton of fun. I wanted to ask about your writing process or practice for the book, because you're not only, I mean, writing your third book here, but you're also a full-time mom, and you've now got a kitten, and you're also a mentor in the Legend Fiction community, and you've got other stuff that you're doing. So how did you make it work for you to write a third book here?
Yeah, great question. And before I dive into that, just a quick, because you mentioned Arthurian romances, I do have to say that before I wrote this one, I was reading a lot of Arthurian romances, and very much the code of honor and kind of like the intense man pride. You've insulted my honor that you see in those kinds of stories.
Yeah.
I was playing a lot with that in this particular book. So haven't seen Merlin, but did base a lot of this on Arthurian romances.
Oh, that's cool. Do you have a favorite story that's come out of all of that reading?
One I legitimately really like is Gawain and the Green Knight, which I still haven't seen the movie, but when the movie came out, my husband's like, "Oh, I got to read this because there's a movie coming out," and I was like,
Yeah.
"Okay."
So what is it you like? Total detour here. What is it that you like then about Gawain and the Green Knight? What is it that calls to you?
I love the adventure of it, and I just love how it's very much like a fairy tale, especially compared to the other Arthurian romances, in that you've got the Green Knight who comes in and he challenges these guys, and it'd be very dishonorable for them to just say, "No, that's dumb. I'm not going to take that challenge." So of course they do. And then basically this Gawain has to go on this adventure and maintain his virtue in order to defeat this guy, the Green Knight. And it's a tale about morality and how, if you're upright and you're honorable, things will work out for you in the end. But Gawain is not a perfect character. Like, he makes a mistake and he pays for it a little bit in the end. So it's kind of interesting to just see that morality tale and see a knight character who's not perfect, especially as compared to the other Arthurian romances, where reading a series of them, I'm like, man, these knight protagonists are all exactly the same. They all are, and they're all perfect by the standards of their time, right? They're all going to fight the giant and be honorable, and it'll go on for like 10 paragraphs about how they're dressed. And I'm like, one of these is fine, but 10 of these, they start to sound the same. But then you've got Gawain, which is very different. You have a flawed hero and this really great morality tale. So that's what I really liked about that one in particular.
Yeah, no, that's cool. Well, let's come back to then the writing, how you got through writing the book with everything else going on, and how you found a way to enjoy staying creative and staying in the zone.
Yeah, that's a great question. So it was easier for me on this one than it was when I was starting out. When I was starting out, I had a full-time job. So I would have to wake up at 5 a.m. and from 5 to when I started my day job at 8, I would just be doing creative writing. And that was obviously very exhausting. So for this one, because we're trying to make a business out of writing, because I'm doing it full time, I had my husband and I each, as being self-employed, have set time slots we work. And when it's not our turn to work, we homeschool the kids. So we split childcare and working 50-50 right now, which works out really well for us.
Nice.
And it's great because it gives the kids, the kids have just as much dad as they do mom. And I think that that's a real privilege. And I think that's really good for them. Yeah.
So I want to go back to a question I asked you earlier, because it's intriguing to me for someone to write, a different gender. I mean, we've had conversations in the community about how to do it right and how to do it wrong and all of the tropes and stuff. And what's something that you learned writing not only a different gender, but somebody who's kind of not like you and who doesn't react like you to the world? I think you told me at one point you've had some good conversations about that kind of mind shift you had to go through. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think there's something important that both readers and authors need to differentiate, which kind of gets muddled based on my conversations on this. I relate to a character and I understand a character, right? And I like a character. So if we're talking about a character that I relate to, a character that just feels like me, then I would say, Alex, for my first book, cut and paste of who I was at 16, kind of insecure, right? Very introspective, that sort of thing. But when we look at a character like Augustine, do I personally relate to him? Am I like him? Not as much. Is that a bad thing? No, because I understand him. I've known other people like him. So just because I'm not like him personally doesn't mean he's not a real character and he's not relatable. So I think that that's something important that readers need to think about, especially because readers, both readers and authors, kind of their majority of them are female, just statistically, right? They're probably introverts. The majority of readers and authors are introverts as well. So when you're writing a character who's male and who's an extrovert, that's different than both you as the author, usually, and probably different than your audience. So it's a little bit of a challenge to find a way, not how can you make your audience relate to a character that's different than them, but how can you help them to understand them and maybe see somebody they love in that character? And that's what I was thinking about with Augustine. It's like, I'm not him, but he's somebody in my life that I love. Mhm.
So what have been some of the reactions to it? Because I could see people trying to do that and then just falling into tropes or stereotypes. Was that something you grappled with, not kind of falling into stereotypes?
Yeah, and that's a challenge, right? Because I hate to say like this character is masculine and this character is feminine, because I wouldn't want to say, oh, if your character is introspective and they think deeply or they overthink things, then they're a female character. Well,
Yeah.
no, there's men who do that too. It's kind of
Yeah.
dangerous to say that, right?
Mhm. To
um,
assign like values or things just to one side or to the other.
yeah, so I would say that Augustine is more of a stereotypical male character than,
Hmm.
say, Alex, who's, probably more stereotypically female because he's
Hmm.
gentler. Um, but they're both very masculine in their own way, just in very different ways.
Hmm.
And I think, I think sometimes readers would struggle with that because readers themselves are not they're not necessarily the warrior types, right? They're not the types who
Hmm.
are going to be fighting the battles to defend people. They've got a different set of gifts and characteristics.
Hmm.
But so Augustine's not a reluctant hero. He's a hero who wants to be a hero.
Yeah, he's a luctant hero, not, well, whatever.
That's our new word.
Yeah.
I
Leaping into the fray.
I think that that readers, introverts, and particularly women, identify with the reluctant hero a lot more because, like, okay, I'm forced into this situation, and now I have to stand up and be bold and be a hero. So they
Hmm.
relate to that versus somebody who wants to be a hero. They've trained their whole life to be a hero,
Hmm.
and their entire character arc is, I have to slow down. Actually, I have to be less bold.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Makes
you've
me
got
think of like what is it, Saint Ignatius, I think. Hero his whole life till his legs are shot out from under him, and then he's stuck in a castle tower and ignored and stuff, and he has to find himself.
yeah.
But it's a different kind of story. So when you create that kind of character, I mean, one of the things that I would see happening is you're aligning the book with a certain kind of audience, a certain kind of reader is now really going to kind of enjoy this. Um, did you kind of grapple with the sense that maybe writing a character in this way and having him make the choices that he does, um, how do I say it's going to challenge your current readership to think a little bit differently? And I think that's what I'm hearing you saying is you're kind of asking them to relate to somebody at a different level than just their immediate kind of, oh, we feel the same.
Right. So, and that is a challenge. So, I have had some of the beta readers saying, like, I don't relate to Augustine as much as I relate to Alex, or I don't like him as much as I like Alex. And you know what? That's totally okay. This is not every story, every character is different. And you're going to
Yeah.
like some more than others. And you're going to relate to some more than others. That's 100% okay. But I do think
Mhm.
it's kind of an interesting thing to see because so many of the characters that I've read in novels are like the readers or like the authors. They're introverts and they overthink a lot of things. They're very deep thinkers, right?
Mhm.
So to write a character that's different than that, I think the audience can have a harder time connecting with a character who is
Yeah.
extroverted and who actually needs to step back and learn to be less bold. They want the
Right.
character that learns to be more bold because that's who
Mhm.
they are.
And again, you're speaking in terms of the audience that you've already built. So you're doing something a
Right.
little bit different with the audience who enjoy hearing from you. There's an last question having to do with um, relatability. I remember reading something at some point that there's this move today with a lot of popular media to always want characters to be relatable to audiences. And what ends up happening is everybody then wants to see themselves on screen or see their tribe on screen or their community on screen. We want to be, what's the word, represented and so on.
Right.
And I remember somebody wrote an article or something making a point that when the culture gets to that point, you have lost the point of fiction
Mhm.
because you can have blue aliens and fairies and smurfs and people
Mhm.
will love them and relate to them even though there
Mhm.
are no blue aliens or smurfs, but because we resonate and relate with who they are as persons, not just
Mhm.
as, I don't know, maybe people. And that strikes me as one of the reasons why fiction is so important, is because
Mhm.
you are entering into somebody else's life and you're learning to feel what it's like to be them on
Mhm.
their own terms. Curious what you think about that.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with you, and I think there's a careful balance that you have to make, right? Because I remember growing up, and even in the 90s, right, there just weren't a lot of strong female. I hate the term strong female characters, but I think you know what I mean. Like the girl was in the movie to be the romantic interest, and she
Mhm,
didn't have a lot of her own goals and ambitions, right? And
mhm,
now we have a lot of female characters who are really well rounded. They're just normal characters like everyone else, and I think that that's fantastic. But I also do think you can take it too far to the point where you have to be able to relate to every single one of the characters, and it no longer becomes about coming outside of yourself and saying, what goes on in the mind of this other person, a person who's different than me,
mhm,
and how can I understand and appreciate who that person is, even if I don't, personally relate to them? How
mhm,
can I understand them and like them? Do I see in them someone else that I know or someone else that I love who's not me? And I think
mhm,
that that's something that's extremely important as authors to explore. And it forces you as authors to go out and talk to people who are different than you and try to understand their experiences.
mhm.
And I'm always telling authors to do this because authors are introverts, and the reaction I get a lot is, "But I'm so shy." And I'm like,
Oh
"Yeah,
my gosh, people,
human."
no.
I'm like, "Well, I was shy too. I still like you don't
Yeah.
believe it talking to me, but I still am a little bit.
Mhm.
But how about we face our fears? How about we do the thing that the hero in our books is already doing? I mean, they're forced to face a dragon. You can go out and talk to your next door neighbor."
Yeah, yeah. Well, hey, friends, if you enjoyed this, please do hit that like button and subscribe. It's going to help more people to discover this channel and to hear about Katie's book. Katie, where can people find you online if they want to order copies of Doctors, Assassins, and Other,
And
what is
other
it?
tyrants.
Tyrants, not terrorists, tyrants. Okay. Where can they find you online?
Yes, so obviously you can get my all of my books on any online retail store, but you can get all of them at katiesfables.com is where you'll find all of my books plus lots of free stories if you just want to sample my work before you commit with your dollars. So
Fantastic. Friends, if you enjoyed this conversation, come and check us out at legendfiction.com. We are an online community for Catholic and Orthodox writers to give and get feedback, share your writing progress, and maybe double or triple your writing output because we're all just having so much fun. Plus, we've got this incredible academy, and Katie is teaching workshops in them. Gosh, what else we have going? There's so much going. Check out legendfiction.com, and you can start your 30-day free trial. To see what it's like to spend time with Katie and hang around other creative writers like you. And if you like reading, grab a copy of Katie's book. Till next time, keep writing.